We live?
Almost, I think. Waiting for this blue button on LinkedIn. And there it is. Happy Friday. My last show of the day, number 4. Happy to do it with Danielle Urban. How you doing today?
Doing great. Doing really good.
And talking about workspaces overall in this series, but and one of my favorite reasons for doing this is I learn so much from having these sessions with other HubSpot experts, especially in cases like this. I try to keep an open mind when I can, but when you're internal, my internal days of HubSpot and one of the most common things that it's like everybody wants to see, that the super shiny object is like lead scoring, like, and that always takes, it's like, how much do those scores mean? Like, can we even give our sales team, like, how often do they get like hot leads based on scores? And then they reach out and they're like, what are you doing? Just because they watched a video, like, this person doesn't know anything. They're not like, what happened? Why are you doing this to me, marketing? Right. So we're here today to talk about scores a little bit. Uh, and because in theory, so if you can just walk me through, like, when it's done right, what does scoring do?
I mean, it really helps in the context of workspaces because it helps you prioritize. So it tells you what to do with different tiers of people or different tiers of contacts and how much they've engaged. And it's been coming up so much for me lately in several different ways. And I feel like HubSpot creates what a property called HubSpot score out of the gate. So as soon as you like log in for the very first time to your brand new HubSpot instance, you will have a property called HubSpot score. I don't think there's anything in it. But a lot of times people just take that for what it is and run with it and start adding things. And of course, we're not going to hit on this today, but there is the new lead scoring app that's a really cool experience and much better for creating and building that score and communicating that and sort of reviewing it with other members of your team. Much improved UI over the property creation that we had up until this point. It does have some limitations that I found with some of my clients, but we'll get into that another time. And it's still in beta, so obviously there will likely be improvements before it gets released fully. But in the context of creating scores, we could probably spend hours digging into like what's the right way to do it. How do you determine the attributes that you build into your score? But I really want to focus on how that fits into a work stream for a team when you have it dialed. So we'll go through the process of building it out and we can preview the new property builder that Kyle Jepson highlighted this morning that's in public beta. And then we can talk about the different types of scores that you might build in beyond HubSpot score, because pro accounts get, is that 5 scores? 5 custom scores, and enterprise client HubSpot users get 25 scores. So there is definitely room to do a lot there.
Awesome. Yeah, I look forward to seeing that today, because it's definitely, in theory, it sounds amazing, right? If you can capture all this behavior and data and create great context, for the person you're asking to reach out or to take action, that's the whole goal of, like, the CRM itself, right? And
Yeah.
it's a lot better if we can make a couple of properties to tell, let's say 100 data point story sometimes, right? And I think that's where, I should let you say, because I have very strong feelings just with some baggage. So, like, I'll let you say, like, where do people, what are the most common mistakes that people make when it comes to scoring?
Ooh, there's a lot. I tend to find when I get into a new account and I start digging into scoring and I want to map what's there, it usually is kind of a one person effort to jump in there and add all the things that they think matter. And those things might only be mattering to marketing. Like no one else really cares that that thing got done. It may not be significant in how the selling process moves forward or how they move through life cycle stages. So step 0 is kind of identifying what are the activities that matter. And there are so many different ways to do that. I'm not going to get into all of them. You can use AI to help distill some of that information. As general guidance, I would encourage you to look at the activity and lifecycle paths for recently closed deals to see what things they interacted with prior to the deal getting created and through the pipeline all the way to close, to give you some idea of what significant activities you may want to score for that are meaningful. I also find that a lot of people just load up one score. So they have a single score in their account and it is just absolutely stacked with everything. And so you've got fit type information like ICP attributes, title attributes. You've got activity attributes about things that people have done. You've got email opens, and that is a whole soapbox that I could get on another time. And so really understanding what's in there is the first thing you should do. Coming back to our conversation about auditing, that's one of those things that you kind of need to pull out of HubSpot and get into a spreadsheet to see clearly until you migrate to the new Builder app for lead scores. Then it'll be pretty straightforward to see everything in one place. But if you're taking over an existing account, then it's still going to be in the old lead score property view. So taking that and getting it into a spreadsheet and understanding what is in there, and then kind of using that spreadsheet as a starting point to reorganize things into at least 2 scores, probably more like 3 or 4, depending on what you need to measure against. But I would love to go ahead and share my screen here and show you the scoring spreadsheet that I usually start with. And I am more than happy to share this if anyone wants to comment and take a look. Start here.
Yes. And this is where, like, there's lots of use cases. No matter how hard I am on spreadsheets and how HubSpot, gets rid of them eventually, most of the time that, like, the value is like just starting to plan and iterate before, like, do something outside of HubSpot so you can at least understand because it's so easy to just start building in there, and that's when you get into trouble. So yes. I love seeing templates, like this.
And HubSpot is pulling us away from these spreadsheets because they launched that new app. They're trying to make this experience much easier for everyone to start and communicate out. So that becomes its own workspace, which we can review another time. That's currently in private beta. But at an absolute baseline, I always encourage my clients to have an activity score or an engagement score that looks at their engagement with different types of marketing activity. I've got these gray headers here that break it down into web, email, asset engagement, activities, social ads. Really, this is all going into the same score. This is just a visual divider as we start to plan for it. But it does help you think through the different ways, the different touch points that your business would have with a contact as they get started. And then having it very clearly laid out where you've got the negative scores in red so that it's obvious. Sometimes I even have them in separate columns. But this really helps to start the conversation on, like, what matters? What are we measuring? How much does it matter? And how does that play into sort of the broader flow that someone would take, or the broader journey that someone would take to becoming a customer with us? And
yes.
What matters for your business, because it's different for everybody. Maybe you've got a really killer daily newsletter or live stream on LinkedIn, and you want to score higher for some of that social activity. There are some businesses, many of them, where LinkedIn activity is just not able to be measured in any way that's meaningful, or at least not get into HubSpot. So that social activity may not exist in your scores. But keeping a single score focused on activity that is separate from a target ICP, title score, that kind of thing, really helps both, really everyone. I was going to say sales and marketing, but it's truly everyone in the business understand who is coming in and, like, why do they matter for who they are and why do they matter for what they did. You could have an off the charts perfect ICP score for someone and they only have 5 points because they did one thing. And if they're, a known contact and not just an anonymous web visitor, then you've got a score on them. So if they've watched one webinar or a single video and you've somehow captured that activity to that contact, then you want to hit that contact up as soon as possible. Like you want to nail that recency because they were just there. You want to have a conversation about the thing that they watched, and that points value is going to help you prioritize them so that you can get that quick follow-up over some like sales intern who's just trying to get up to speed. Might even be internal. Hopefully you've added that into your scoring. But they're watching all the videos to get up to speed on what this new product is that they are about to get hands and keyboard for, but they're never going to be a sales opportunity, at least not at that point. So making sure that you've got that title score separated out from the activity score is an excellent first step for moving ahead in your scoring maturity. I've also found pretty often, like I was saying, everyone just fully loads it in there. I've also made this mistake. I have since learned otherwise. You take these two scores and add them together and call it your single score, or like your sales score, lead score. So don't do that either, because then your sales intern who's trying to watch all the videos and get up to speed is suddenly going to look like the hottest lead in HubSpot, when really it just doesn't make sense to engage with them in the same way that you would for someone who's got a really high ICP score. So keeping that separate and making that really obvious in your filtered views, in your contact records, is really going to serve everybody very, very well.
Yeah, because I'd imagine like the score only, like it's got to mean something that
Right.
people trust, right?
Yes.
And like when I see a score of 100, like if I don't know something about how they got to 100, then I cannot trust that score, right?
Yeah, then it's just noise.
Yeah.
For sure.
And that's one of our keys of not having in your workspace. Like, gotta remove all the noise. This is the quickest path. Stuff like this is the quickest path to get sales disengagement in what you want them to be doing, right? And unfortunately, you can build a bunch of trust, and like they get onboarded, but the second that you put something in front of that they can't trust, it's like just all that work gone.
Yeah. But to put a more positive spin on that, it's also a quick way to gain trust. Like if you're
Yes.
able to say here and communicate it in a way that everyone can see, maybe you do a quick sales training or lunch and learn or something like that with the whole company, to say when you see an ICP score that is 20 points or higher, here's how they likely got there. And then they understand how that fits alongside the activity score. So you can say, if it's an activity score of 5, it still matters, but you need to be able to communicate that. And then you very quickly build that rapport of like, oh, I'm just going to look for anyone who has an activity score higher than 5, and then assess them or stack rank them based on their ICP score, their fit score. Beyond the contact level, one of the mistakes that I often see is loading up different objects into a single score. And in some cases, that might make sense if you need to build some of your processes off of contacts first or off companies first. Then, tying things across objects might make sense there. But generally, if you've got all 5 to 25 scores to play with, you might as well break them out into different things. And now we've got the new sync properties, which can be really helpful. So you can show on the contact record what the company ICP score is, and you can have a separate score at the company level, because on the contacts, you have title or function or management level, things that you might be able to measure against, especially if you've got some kind of enrichment tools in place. But on the company level, you have industry fit, I've got partners and competitors, you have existing customers, you've got all kinds of things that are relevant to a company in how you sell to them and how you rank them, that should not get loaded into a contact assessment score. So having that broken out can be great. But if you do need to see it on the contact level, you can set up a sync property. I think sync properties actually might be limited to multiple choice. I'll have to check on that when we jump into the property builder tool. But either way, you can sort of make it visible in a associated object table when you do your record customization, if you really need to be able to see that on the record, so that you don't have to have it blended together in a single score, and you can really make sense of where these numbers are coming from and why they're relevant.
Yeah, and just as you talk about this, like again, I love the theme of this series. Like when you're an admin or somebody who's not in that workspace, like the importance of where the score appears, what it appears next to, all the context. Like, if you don't know that, I would imagine those are the times where you try to build all that context into the score, right? And then it gets really messy. But not understanding where in the journey that the sales team is going to use this, where are they seeing it on their screen, on their record, right? Because you don't want to have a really trusted thing here and then another really trusted thing over here, and they're not, they're contradicting each other somehow, right? Like avoiding situations like that. So understanding, again, here we are at the workspace, like how can we create these single views that people can work from, they trust, and that ultimately gets them to success with the tool.
Definitely. And so these are the 3 scores that I usually pitch to all clients. From there, just in this past week, I've had really interesting conversations around other types of scores. One of them being like an engagement score by team. So based on who they're emailing or which team that user that's emailing them is a member of. I don't know how I'd build that, but I'll figure it out. Um, but trying to see like what is the engagement score with the CSM team? What is the engagement score with the sales team? And what is the engagement score with the marketing team? And sort of separating out and defining those touch points with the different teams so that everyone has a score, but then thinking about how that plays into like a land and expand SaaS model where you've got the marketing engagement to bring them in the funnel, the sales engagement to close a deal, and then the CSM engagement to potentially expand and then pass it back to sales. Understanding the influence of each team on that process can get really interesting when you've got data behind it. And building that structure so that it's easy to read and you don't have to get into some like complicated attribution and backing into that information. You're just building that up front so that you can slice and dice the data. I was also talking to a client about potentially doing a calculated weighted score. So if we roll up into a calculated property the activity score for each associated contact to a company, then weighting it based on their fit score. So if we've got a contact who has a really high fit score, let's throw out a number like 50, they've got a killer match on title and they are going to watch a video. I want the company score to move up significantly versus that sales intern who's trying to get up to speed and watching all the videos. I want their score loaded into that company roll up activity score, but at a much lower weight. So if we do like the activity score times some range of the ICP score, then we add all those together for the associated contacts and roll it up. Again, I don't know how I'd build that, but I'll figure it out. The advanced calculation properties are getting really cool these days. So if we can build that, then we've got this like fully loaded activity score that's a roll up for the company. And again, we can like float those to the top of the list as soon as we start to see those numbers pop and know that it's significant because we've weighted it appropriately. I've also talked about a recency score with one of my clients. They've got sort of a 6-month closeout for their leads. So if somebody pops back up within those 6 months, it's still considered part of the original lead journey. But if they disappear for 6 months and then come back, and so trying to build in a score to help visualize that, understand that, and operationalize that through the rest of their processes is also going to be interesting. So there's a lot that you can do. I also, one other use case I talked to someone about is using it as a KPI for engagement with sort of education or CSMs. If you have educational content that's you're using for onboarding or further engagement past onboarding, then you can have like a knowledge engagement score and use that as a KPI for the education team that's building that out. So yeah, there's some really cool stuff you could do.
Yeah. And it's like, for me, even I'm like, I think I can follow 100%, but just because like, I know that the reason this is not as complicated as it sounds, like there's complexity here, but it's not complicated when you work with known data. Like most of this is like, this thing is happening. You know your system is tracking it. Now, how can we curate it in a way that we don't have to wait until the end of the month to review the long report, right? And start to understand it, right? Like, how can we understand it instantaneously? Because we know that response time can be one of the most powerful, like closers of
Yeah.
business, of relationships, however you want to do it. That response time matters so much. If we can make this stuff immediately visible, especially like the customer success stuff that you're talking about. And when everybody cares about, upsell, resell, cross sell, expansion, right? This is the kind of stuff that enables that. And after somebody's a customer, it comes down to you. Like, you have like perfect information almost, right? And it's how you use that information to empower your team to make, quick decisions, act quickly. That's the difference between reaching those expansion goals and not.
Yeah. And we've mostly been talking about this in the context of, marketing and sales following up on leads and, even potentially extending that to CSMs. But when you start to think about the ranges that might need marketing automation or might benefit from marketing automation to move them further down the funnel or to re-engage them after onboarding to get them to come back and log in, using an engagement score for educational materials or looking at the activity scores that are under a certain threshold and making a specific nurture for them using the fit score. You could have a low fit nurture and create some evangelists for your product who are never going to buy it, but might tell a lot of people about it because they think it's cool. And sort of seeing the value and being able to segment your audience in a way that makes a lot of sense to automate things in addition to that quick follow-up.
Yes, I'm loving this because it is helping me understand this in a different way. And when I can think about it in the way of like context, like it's a contextual score of what's happening, and who's engaging. That should be very valuable, at the end of the day for people to have. And that's where I think the key is making sure what that score means, like making sure it actually, like, we're not just excited about the video so
Right.
that whenever anybody watches it, we just got to reach out, like
Yeah.
understanding what it actually means. And that's where perfect information, you might not have it all in the system, but there's certainly a sales or a CSM team that can give you very clear information that's in their heads about every time this thing happens, then this thing happens. And when you
Mm.
find more of those and build that into your system, wow, like that's
Yeah.
what gets teams going in the right direction.
I also feel, I don't know why this reminded me of this, but I should share my very strong warning that if you are making changes to an existing score, create it as a new score first. Build it as a new score. Understand what's going to happen. Your two options after you build that new score are to either change over the workflows to reference that new score, change over the processes and record customization and all that to reference the new score, or understand what's going to happen and sort of analyze the difference between those two scores and know what it's connected to, and then go make the change in your original score and let it cascade through, because any changes you make to a score are instantaneous and you might MQL 60,000 people by accident. So don't make my mistake, and
It
please
happens.
create the extra score. I think when you even have 5 scores, leave yourself that one for headroom for testing, and just sort of let it exist. If you don't already have a sandbox, sandboxes are great for that too. Uh, but yeah, just make sure that you test everything before you push anything into live.
No, that is a great point because that's where, like, understanding the complexity is important. Whether it's like when you start building all these things together that are dependent on each other, and you do the, like, you start to include things in the mix that you're already doing. You've talked about strategy, like when the new piece of content, you start doing new content, right? And then it starts
Mm-hmm.
getting added in places you weren't planning. And can that automatically change a score? Like, all these pieces, just understand them first and then, build in what you need. So I love that point.
Yes, it's a giant red warning for everybody. And it came up for me because you were saying when you've got a new video that everyone's really excited about, if you decide that that video is important this week and you go change the points from like 10 to 50 on that video, all of a sudden you are, one, breaking down trust, and two, potentially kicking off some automations that you might have. Like the ripple effect that can happen from making that one little number change can be huge. And so understanding sort of how these pieces fit together is important, but my advice to overcome that is just create a new one and go from there. But
Yeah.
I would love to create a new one. Seeing this new beta, I haven't touched this yet. I just saw Kyle's video this morning about the new create property experience.
It's fun. Me and Matthew were talking about it earlier. It's
Yeah, this is very exciting for me.
yeah.
And I
So what
love
are you
that we can
thinking
kind
here when you see this new space?
I love how the new internal name is broken out. I've seen in a lot of cases where the internal name is just not even in anyone's peripheral. Like it's just not on the radar because people don't understand what it's for. Um, it's for APIs. So, like when
Yep.
you start creating things, I've found stages named in the most bizarre ways. So, having it a little bit more obvious here is really great. Having the tooltip about it, super, super helpful. Like, I think that makes it more obvious than it ever has been before. I love that it's a full screen takeover. I'm going to try not to get too much into wish list things here, but this
Yeah.
is very cool.
And I think like obviously the first button click is definitely going to be surprising for some people, but a lot of the things that they were building into that sign bar was taking you into a new screen like this anyways. Stuff
Right.
like, conditional uh, rules and stuff like that. So, and calculated properties was going to take you into. So really they've been building up to this.
Yeah, I would love to see sort of the create customization that we have with like the list create form that got a glow up earlier this year, where you can determine what properties are there. Um, and I would love to have like require descriptions or put in my own tooltip for descriptions, like make sure this is here and explain it in this way, because people create properties all the time. I also would probably flash up, you know how if you're going to delete contacts or edit a big bulk of contacts, you get all these warnings that are like, type the number of contacts you're about to influence.
Yeah.
I think I need that for creating all properties to make sure that my clients don't create like 57 properties or like one property per webinar, which I've seen more than once.
Yeah.
Like that just gets a little crazy. But I think that just comes back to making sure that everyone getting into HubSpot is getting some level of education where they understand how the pieces connect together. That's why we're here.
Right. Yeah. There's a space here. I'm curious. I'll let you build this out, but we saw a coaching little message show up based on the one that I built. So
Ooh. I clicked into calculation, but I think we should think about scores first since that's what we're
yeah.
talking about. Awesome. And then this
Yeah.
is what we're
And
so
the
familiar
space,
with.
like just the fact that we have space now, we can
Yeah.
put extra information about how this stuff should be working. We can lead you better, right? Instead of trying to shove everything into a sidebar.
Yeah. I think let me go look at your score that you currently have, because one thing I haven't liked is that when you're doing scoring, I think you have to scroll all the way down to the bottom in the sidebar to hit save. And so this
Okay.
makes the save button very, very obvious. And like there
Oh, when you're making
isn't
the
a great
property.
way to get out of this unless you hit save or back. Whereas when you just have the fly in sidebar, you can kind of just click out of it and not realize that you've lost any work.
Yeah.
So
Definitely
I,
the rework requirements when you just want to go back and accidentally close it.
right, because
Yeah.
you can and should be tweaking your scores all the time. Again, think about how it's going to impact things. But if you start to realize that that video that marketing invested lots of money in and cared a lot about doesn't actually matter, then you should go devalue that a little bit, and tweak things over time.
No baggage there.
No, none at all. I
Man.
didn't just trigger a whole lot of marketers. It's fine.
It's like, but we spent 30,000 on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you won't make that mistake again. But yeah, when you come into score, so this is kind of where I was talking about all the different cross object things that you could take a look at. When you've got when you're building a contact score, which we are right now. Again, this is super cool. I like how it reminds you we're in a contact record. Um, it makes it very easy to look across all of these different things, and in some cases you might, but for the most part, the I would keep it to one object. And even within one object, you'll still click a bunch of these things, like form submissions usually is very relevant to contacts, and it's not technically a separate object, even though it kind of looks like it here. But as you start to build out those contact properties, I think we've all seen this before. We could just do email is known. You probably shouldn't score for that, but just to go through the experience and see it, this is great. I'm really loving this. And this used in tab, I love having this in a bigger screen. I think that's my like biggest
Yeah.
takeaway and first impression from this is like normally I open this in the sidebar and I just open these into a bunch of new tabs when I'm getting into a new account or trying to understand why something isn't working the way I want it to. And I'll still do that, but at least I don't have to worry about accidentally clicking out of it. It makes it really easy to navigate and see it.
Right. And they're just getting so much better all over the place. It's such a like you don't always catch it, but then when you the place where you used to have to right click and open up the thing and now they just you can click on it and it'll open
Yeah.
up the tab for you. Like that stuff is popping up all over the place.
Yeah. That's really cool. Amazing. Well, I think that kind of ties things off for me. Was there, you were saying there was some tooltip educational thing that you saw before. Do we want to try and make that happen again?
Yeah, so go to let's build a calculated property.
All right.
And it might just be because of the specific thing had to deal with today's date. So
Ooh, interesting.
yeah, I'll do calculation and then change from custom equation to date between, time between. And so this thing at the bottom where it says trying to build a property based on today's date, we recommend
Ooh.
these things. And this is like, I know that there's a lot of emotion around today's date. So I imagine this is not generated, like this is a hard code based on the exact thing that you're trying to do here.
Yeah.
But for me, this sets the precedent. And because we have this space now, we can start to coach people on things that are happening in the system and learn from it and say, hey, maybe we don't need another trade show field. Like you've just created 20 of these. They haven't been touched in it in years. Let's try this. Like maybe you should use the list tool. Maybe we can use the records. So I love this as a precedent just to say, hey, because I would love more people to be doing this when they're
Yes.
consulting or coaching. Like, should you do it this? Well, let's take a look at it. Like,
Yep.
so yeah, this is the kind of stuff. Now that we have the space, we can do it. Like, because I know there's so much good intention that gets lost based on the format that we're like the sidebar. We don't have space, so we can't add in the tooltips, or we can't. Right. This is, I think, people get over very quickly. You know, there was a comment earlier about the space that I've got to travel now with my mouse, and it's like we'll get over that. I mean, this experience
I'm over it.
is much better, and just the visibility to be able to go back and forth between, you know, the steps was a big one before. Like, oh, I forgot what the name was. Let me go back and
Yeah.
you know we
And
can.
not being able to edit the internal name after it's created. Like I can go back and once I've, built out this calculated field, if I didn't end up with the thing I intended to create, which does happen sometimes, you start building, you're like, oh, actually, this would be super cool if I just do this and then also create the thing I set out to create. Then you can go back and you can still edit the internal name in this flow and just click between them really quickly. That internal name,
Yes.
I cannot stress the importance enough of like keeping those at least human readable. Like they don't have to be perfect, but at least make them mean something.
Right. And try to be consistent when you can. Like I know, like HubSpot doesn't set the best example. That I think they are now. They've gotten to this HS underscore. But
Yeah.
there's some fun stuff when you look at some of their properties. It's like, hey, just like everybody else, that it was originally built for one purpose. Now it's turned into something else. And as a nerd, sometimes you can tell just by looking at the history of internal property names
Yes.
what's been happening. So no, this has been awesome. Uh, Love being able to show it. And this is why we're here. Like this just dropped, like this week or last week. And it's a big deal. Like people are working hard on these tools, making this experience better. And since we have this space, we get to talk about it. We get to help people understand it. So hopefully this helped. It definitely helped me. I learned a lot about scoring today. Not usually first on my list. I know it. I need to understand it better. And I appreciate you helping me do that today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And if anyone wants a copy of that scoring spreadsheet just as a template, I'm more than happy to share it. It's publicly ready. Just ask me for a link.
Awesome. Well, when you're thinking about scoring and you see those scores and you know that the behavior matters and you want to try to figure out ways to act on it, faster, better, find that opportunity and let's grow. Have a great weekend, everybody.